My grandparents owned a ranch in southern Wyoming. I was a hunter. If you haven't been to southern Wyoming, don't go. It's haunted and dangerous, and it hates you. It's nothing like the posh Tetons or whipped tame Yellowstone up north. It is awash in unreported serial killers, waves of suicides, and the worst demons this or any world has to offer. The land itself is deeply angry. Included on its long list of grievances is that it misses bison, and it's your fault that they're gone. And don't even get me started on the camels. Yeah, the camels. My grandparents owned a chunk of land in southern Wyoming, just a few acres of prairie between Casper and Rock Springs. Enough for a few heads of gelp-feet cattle, chickens, goats, a couple of horses, and a big garden. Enough to live on. Grandpa was born and raised on that land, and Grandma came from the nearby metropolis of Rollins. There was an old steel horse trough in the main corral. The trough wasn't huge, maybe 200 gallons, oblong and tall enough for horses to drink from comfortably without widening their front legs. There were always a handful of common goldfish living in it. I had been strictly warned about approaching the water trough in winter, but I had also been warned against acknowledging the chickens in any way, disturbing the round steel hatch cover in the back pasture, leaving the house via the back door without knocking on it 5 times first, speaking above a whisper near the tool shed, and touching the bronze black ooze that occasionally poured in snotty streams from the barn hayloft. So, in my mind, too many rules and therefore none. But I should have listened. The goldfish didn't need to be fed. They darted to the surface when they felt the earthquake of a big old farm horse amble up. And while the horse drank, the fish ate the thick, ropey saliva that dripped into the water. By late summer, the bottom of the trough was always bright green with algae. And the goldfish ate that too. Mosquitoes laid their eggs, beetles fell in and drowned, and the goldfish ate all of it. The horses didn't mind the algae, didn't mind the fish. It seems as if a horse would accidentally bite a fish as they brushed past its teeth, as they chomped and drooled and lipped at the water, but they didn't. When winter came, the first ice was thin enough for the horses to break through easily with their noses. They drank, and the goldfish ate greedily. But after the first real storm, the ice thickened, and it thickened more as the cold set in and stayed. By February, the trough was frozen through, as solid as granite. Snow layered thick on top until it was completely buried, and when the wicked wind moved the drift from the pasture to the cornfield, not a flicker of orange scales could be seen through the marbled ice. In May, sometimes April, the sides of the trough started to sweat. The ice looked slick and tired. It gave up and eventually melted away. Then, one day every year, in May, sometimes April, the sides of the trough started to sweat. The ice looked slick and tired, and it gave up and eventually gave way. Then one day every year, the daffodils bloomed in bunches between the trough and the fence, and a horse made its way there, nosed aside a lonely floating iceberg, and the goldfish darted hallelujah, phoenix-like from the bottom to eat, healthy as Hawaiian koi. Like I said, I had been warned. When I was 8, my parents went on a romantic vacation to Acapulco, and they left me in my grandparents' care. It was early February, bitterly cold and boring inside. That winter was particularly bad. The wind blows so much in southern Wyoming that the snow doesn't have a chance to stick before it's blown into drifts. And that year, the drifts reached the barn eaves. I snuck out the back door one night when my grandparents were soundly asleep. Of course, I knocked 5 times before I opened it. My grandpa's 3 Australian heelers stirred from their barn beds and followed me. Gip, the lead dog, Grandpa's constant companion, whined and tried to herd me back to the house. But I went straight to the horse trough and started digging into the drift that covered it. I dug a tunnel into the snow to the bottom of the trough and was surprised to find a thin ring of grass around it. Grass that was as green as July. Grass too stupid or happy to care about the cold. I tapped on the lowest rim of the trough, so gentle, and thought for an instant I could sense a slight tapping back. Maybe an echo. Maybe the flick of an orange tail. Maybe it was just the sound of waiting. I pulled my crusted mitten off and put my small hand up against the trough and waited there in the lonely winter darkness for a sign. I pulled my slingshot out of my coat pocket and I swished my hand around my deepest pocket, dredging last fall's dirt under my fingernails, and I pulled out my last pebble. I loaded it into the slingshot, pulled the rubber back to my shoulder, and I let go. The stone hit the side of the trough with a ping that careened up and off into the corral. The ping hung in the air between me and the trough. At first, nothing happened. Then the small sound was split in two loud cracks. First when the ice cracked, and then when it opened into a small crevasse. Suddenly there was a loud boom from inside, like a strong shoulder against a steel door. The whole trough moved forward enough to rip up even an inch of that obscenely green grass. I jumped back and landed on my back facing the trough. Two of the dogs yipped and ran off. Gip lowered his head, raised his hackles, and growled deeper and louder than I thought it could be possible in a dog that size. We heard the hissing sound before we saw the winding streams of black, greasy smoke, pushing and stretching out of the cracks in the ice. As the tendrils grew, they wove into each other until they fed a single, flat, bottomless black column of smoke, as big around as a car tire. As the tendrils grew, they wove into each other until they fed a single, flat, bottomless black column of smoke, big around as a car tire. A column that hissed and rose and solidified, then shifted, solidified, then shifted again. I swear I heard voices coming from it. A woman talking rapidly and a girl whispering, and a man swearing under his breath. And then I heard something that froze me on the spot. From the smoke came the sound of my grandpa's voice, talking to his horses. The faraway sound of my grandmother calling him to dinner. The sound of the cattle braying and the barn door closing. The sound of the cattle braying and the barn door closing. And me moving my coat zipper up and down as I stood contemplating the horse trough. The exact sound of the dogs yipping and Gip's growl. The end of the column formed a giant ball that quickly morphed into what looked like a rattlesnake head. Then it noticed me. It happened so fast that by the time I realized it was going to strike me, it was too late for me to run. I was too close and frozen in my spot anyhow. Gip lunged for it, but bit nothing but air where the snake's giant body pretended to be. The entirety of that smoke column dove into my mouth, and it became thick as sand. I couldn't choke because there was no air. It was forcing itself down my throat, and as I blacked out, I twisted on my back and saw Gip furiously barking back at the door, and the kitchen lights went on. I woke up in the sunshine, completely disoriented. It took me a minute to realize that I was at my grandparents' house, safe in the guest bed. I threw off the sheets. I was wearing the shorts and the t-shirt that I always wore to bed, but my feet were filthy with soot and dead winter grass. I ran out into the kitchen. This is actually the part of the story that is seared into my memory above all the others. My grandmother was sitting at the kitchen table, eating a piece of honey toast, with a deep, ragged tear in her arm that started at her bicep and ripped down almost to her elbow. Grandpa was sitting in the chair next to her, calmly sewing up the wound. He was almost halfway done. "Good morning, dear," my grandma said to me without flinching or without pain as Grandpa pushed the needle through her skin. "We had quite a storm last night. I'm so glad that you were able to sleep through it." "Yep," said my grandpa. "Your grandmother went to check out the chickens, and a branch from that old oak tree fell and gave her a pretty good scratch here. But everything's all right now." I sat down. I honestly didn't know what to say. I felt insane. "Are the animals okay?" I finally asked. Grandma laughed, like casually laughed. "We lost a goldfish from the horse trough," she said, "but there are plenty more where that came from." Grandpa chuckled. Hilarious. After that, Gip was never more than 2 feet away from me when I was outside. If I went out the front door, he was there. Out the back door, he was there. And if I made a move to break any of the rules, he would grab my sleeve in his jaws and pull me away. I've told this story many times to my parents, and they just laugh. The weather is unpredictable up here, they say. The prairie isn't an easy place, they say. But my grandmother, to this day, has a very distinct scar on her right arm, and I know where it came from, and it wasn't a goldfish.